This is a LeadCommerce overview video. We're going to be talking specifically about how to import, export your items or your products in LeadCommerce today. So this video is here to assist you in kind of understanding how to get your items into the database using our import capability, which you'll find in the back office. So really, to do an import, you're going to need two pieces of the puzzle. Really, you're going to need obviously to be logged into the back office of LeadCommerce. So you'll need a username and a password to get logged in. If you don't have one, contact your administrator or whomever set your company up with LeadCommerce, and I'm sure they'll get you your own username and password to get into the tool. And then obviously the other thing we need is data. So I've prepared here a sample import file. It's got a number of columns that we're going to import today. So I'm going to go over some of these columns, what they mean, how they're going to get imported in. Then we'll export this out as what's called a CSV. And then we'll go into LeadCommerce and actually import it into the database. So just looking at the file really quickly here, in LeadCommerce, typically you're going to have some sort of a unique ID number. That unique ID number could be a UPC code, could be some sort of a legacy identification number that you've been using for a number of years. But at the end of the day, as long as the number is unique, you'll be able to import it in. Next column over is just a very brief description. I entitled this column item name, but basically just describes in real words what the item is. Item name or product name is required, so you can't create an item without a name, so this is a required field. Price and cost are basically what you're going to sell the product for and how much does it cost you when you buy it from your supplier. Neither one of these fields are required, actually. So you don't necessarily have to import a price for every item. You don't necessarily have to have a cost for every item. If you don't pass in price and cost, again, it's not required. LeadCommerce is going to autofill, however, the price and cost fields for you, and they're going to set both the price and cost at $1. And then finally, I wanted to show off kind of a very cool feature of LeadCommerce, which we call attributes. So from time to time, you might have data in your file, and you're not quite sure what field you should map that data to in LeadCommerce. Or potentially, you might have data in your file that you want to import, and you want it to have its own field. So you don't necessarily want to put it all bundled together with a whole bunch of other data. You want it actually broken out as its own value, and you want to see it in its own field in LeadCommerce. So the way you do that is through an attribute. So I'm going to show you how to do an attribute so that you can control where the data goes, where it gets imported into. Okay, so in order to import data into LeadCommerce, the data itself has to be a CSV file. So I'm using Google Docs today. However, you could be using Excel. If you go into the file menu, there's an option either to do what's called a save as, or in the case of Google Drive and Google Docs, there's a download as option. And I'm going to choose comma separated value, or CSV. So this is the type of file that you need to have on your desktop or on your computer saved before you go in to actually import your items into the database. So we'll go ahead and just download that there. And I'm going to go back to the login screen, and I'll go ahead and log in. So again, depending on your privileges and depending on how your administrator has set up the system, where you want to go is basically the catalog. The catalog is where you're going to find all of your products, and it's basically where you're going to load up the import utility. The import utility actually is in this More menu. So if I just click on Catalog, it takes me right to Products. And then if I click in more, there's an option here called import. The importer is going to load up this window, and this is where I'm going to go find that CSV file. So there's my CSV. And there's two types of imports that you can do. The first is what we call a create. And a create is where we are creating the products from the very start. So this is where the product does not currently exist in the database. If the product already exists in the database, and let's say that we wanted to come through and change all the prices of our products, then we would do what's called an update. So again, it depends on what you're wanting to do, but the best way to think about it is a create, we're creating it from scratch. An update, we're updating something that already exists. So since these have never been imported before, I'm going to do a create. There's another option here on the left called file has headers. So if we flip back to my file, you'll notice that the very first column is the column headings. So these are the headers for each column. So if I don't obviously want to import this into the system, then I want to ignore the first column, and that's what this option is. File has headers. It's going to basically allow me to ignore that very first row. So you hit save, and it goes ahead and processes the file. And when it processes the file, it'll pull in the very first 6 rows of your CSV. So I can see, here's column 1, here's column 2, here's column 3, here's column 4. I can slide over here, and then here's that 5th column. So again, what I'm seeing here is the actual raw data in the file. And then you'll notice that there's a drop-down menu at the top of each column where I'm going to map the data to my file itself. So if I click into this very first drop down here, I know that the first row, or the first column rather, in my CSV is my product ID. So I'm going to choose custom product ID there. I know the second row was that item name or that product name, so I'm going to choose product name. I know the third one was my price, fourth was my cost, and then finally I get to the last column here, and that was that alternative ID. Now you'll notice as I look through here, I don't have an alternative ID available to me. So this is an example where I need to create an attribute if I want to import this data into the database. So I'm going to close here actually, and I'm going to go back over to the catalog again. And this time I'm going to go into the configuration menu here on the left. The very first section that loads up is in the configuration menu is attributes. So I'm going to create an attribute, and I'm actually just going to copy alternative item ID from my file. And I'm going to create a small text area called alternative item ID. And another very important option here is applies to. So I'm going to apply it to products because I want this attribute to show up on products. So I'm going to apply it to products. And then the type that I'll choose is small text area. And then there's some other options. If I wanted to make it required, I could. If I wanted it to be searchable, I could do those sorts of things as well. So we'll just save that. And so what I've done is I've created a small text area with the header alternative item ID, and that's now in the database. So if we go and look from a product perspective, in the interface itself, there's alternative item ID is now there on the details section. So I added that to the database. I created that field, and so now I'm going to go back to the import again, and I'm going to grab that same file once again on my computer, and I'm going to do a create. And I don't want to bring in the first row, so I'm going to ignore those file headers. and I'm going to do my custom product ID, and then I'm going to do product name, and then I'm going to do price, and then I'm going to do cost. And I'm going to get all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to do alternative item ID. And that's it. So again, if you have extra fields, if there's additional data that you want to get into the database, attributes are a great way to do that. Otherwise, you could omit that information and you could actually come back later on and do it as an update. So a whole bunch of different options in front of you. I'm going to go ahead and import this now. So I just hit the import button. And then it says, thanks for doing that. We'll dispatch an email once it's complete, and then we close that down. And so once I close that window, the importer is actually already running as soon as you submit the job. It does what's called a background process. So it actually runs in the background on the server. So it actually creates an import job. Each job gets a unique ID number, and it'll actually run until it's finished. And then once it's complete, it'll go ahead and send you an email. I know that this completed successfully simply because I can see that there's 10 rows here, and in my file I had 10 records. So here's my paint, my screwdriver, saw, drill bits, all that good stuff. So that's basically how you import into LeadCommerce. Again, you want to start with basically the two main components, which is a CSV file or an Excel file. You want to export that out as a CSV file format. And then to import, you simply go to the catalog, go to the More menu, click Import, and then pull that file in and process it. Really straightforward, very, very simple to do. There's a series of these videos. This one just covered how to import. There's another video that'll show you how to do a SKU export and export out your stock keeping units and do inventory adjustments and all sorts of cool stuff. But ultimately, this should get you started on at least importing your products into the database. Thanks for listening, and thanks for using LeadCommerce.